The rain came down in sheets, heavy and relentless, turning the courtyards into mirrors of broken light. The palace stood on the hill like a wounded animal, proud, trembling, aware that the end had already begun. In the great hall, voices murmured beneath the sound of thunder. A secret was spreading, whispered between servants and guards through corridors once filled with music. Somewhere in the East Tower, a candle flickered beside an old scroll, its ink still wet with betrayal. Tonight would be remembered not for the blood spilled, but for the silence that followed. What truth was buried beneath the ruins of their silence? Morning broke gray and heavy. The kingdom moved like a body half alive. Merchants silent, guards uneasy, and the air thick with rumor. Behind closed doors the council gathered, eyes darting toward the empty chair where the king should have sat. They spoke in riddles and avoided the truth, for truth now had a price. Outside, peasants stared at the palace walls, unaware that their fate had already been written within them. By midday, the rumors found their rhythm. They spread from the kitchens to the market, carried on nervous laughter and half-truths. Some said the king had fallen ill. Others whispered had been betrayed by his own blood. In the taverns, old soldiers clenched their mugs tighter, remembering the last time the bells rang so long. Fear, once silent, began to sing. In the tower, Lady Myron worked without rest. The scrolls she uncovered spoke of forbidden treaties and unseen enemies. The more she read, the colder her hands became. Each line seemed to echo with the voice of someone who knew the kingdom's end was near, someone who had planned it. She realized too late that knowledge itself had become the most dangerous weapon. That night, the bells rang once more. Not for celebration, but warning. The gates were sealed. Fires burned along the walls. From the highest tower, Queen Alara watched the lights vanish one by one, her letter still folded in her hand. She knew then what silence truly meant. The end had not come from without, but from within. The palace felt different the next morning, colder, emptier, as though every wall had learned to listen. Guards whispered orders. No one understood. Messengers rode out under false names. The king's council gathered behind locked doors, voices raised in panic and pride. Yet outside, the rain had finally stopped. For the first time in weeks, the people saw the sky, and it offered no comfort. Rumors had turned to certainty. Betrayal had entered the heart of the kingdom, and it wore a familiar face. In the library below the great hall, Lady Myron found the document she had been searching for. The treaty was real, signed with the king's seal, witnessed by none. It spoke of land exchanged for peace, a promise of gold, and the quiet surrender of the border fortresses. Her fingers trembled as she realized what it meant. The kingdom's safety had been traded long before the first whisper of war. At dusk, Captain Roran gathered his soldiers by the gate. Their armor bore the scars of a forgotten war, and their faces showed the wear of loyalty tested too often. Roran's voice carried across the courtyard, low, steady, heavy with unspoken truth. He told them the king's orders had changed. They were no longer to defend the border. Instead, they were to watch it burn. For the first time, the soldiers did not salute. Queen Alara wandered the silent corridors, her reflection flickering in the marble floors like a ghost of herself. She carried the same letter she had read the night before, now worn and creased. Each word burned into her memory. She had once believed her husband's silence was wisdom. Now she saw it was fear. When she reached the chapel, the candles had already been lit. High Priestess Solon was waiting, and she did not look surprised. Night fell without warning. Thunder returned, distant and low, like the growl of something ancient. From the tower, Princess Lyra saw the torches at the western wall go out one by one. A shadow moved through the mist, riders with no banners, no cry, no mercy. She turned to run, but stopped as she saw a cloaked figure waiting in the hallway. His face was half lit, his hand still wet with rain. In that moment she understood the kingdom had already fallen, not to the enemy outside, but to the betrayal within. The first fire began at the western gate. Some said it was accident. Others swore it was the people's cry for justice. By morning, smoke had swallowed the skyline, and the air stank of ash and fear. The soldiers hesitated to act, torn between the crown and the crowd. From his chamber, King Alden watched the horizon burn, his reflection trembling in the window glass. He had ruled for 30 years by silence, but now that silence had turned against him. In the streets, rebellion spread like wind over dry fields. Farmers carried pitchforks beside blacksmiths and former soldiers. What began as shouts became strikes against the palace gates. Captain Roran rode through the chaos, shouting for restraint, but his voice was drowned by the roar of the desperate. He saw men he had trained raise blades against his own banner. In their eyes he saw not hatred, only the hunger to be heard. Beneath the palace, Lady Myron hid her findings in a hollow behind the library wall. The scrolls now spoke louder than any blade. She knew if discovered, they would seal her fate. But if destroyed, the truth would vanish forever. When footsteps echoed behind her, she turned sharply, clutching a candle. It was Prince Cale. His face was pale, his breath quick. He told her the council had fallen, and that the king had ordered the archives sealed forever. At the temple, High Priestess Solène stood before a sea of frightened citizens. Her voice rose above the storm. Calm, commanding, ancient. She spoke not of loyalty, but of conscience. She told them that truth was older than kings and that faith must serve no master. Soldiers surrounded the temple by dusk. As torches burned, the people fell silent. Solène did not run. Solène did not run. She only lifted her hands toward the flame and whispered, "So, it begins again." By night, rebellion reached the palace walls. Arrows streaked through the mist like falling stars. Within the throne room, Queen Ilara and Princess Lyra stood together, surrounded by the echoes of their fading dynasty. The queen held her daughter's hand tightly, her eyes hollow but unbroken. Outside, the people demanded justice. Inside, the last of the royal blood prepared to face the storm, not as rulers, but as witnesses to their own undoing. The palace bells rang only once that morning, a hollow, trembling note that carried across the smoke-choked valley. It was not a call to prayer, nor a call to arms. It was surrender. Inside the throne room, courtiers whispered their farewells while guards burned the royal banners to keep warm. King Alden sat, slumped upon his throne, his crown resting crooked on his brow. He had been a ruler once. Now he was merely a man waiting for his end. The air smelled of ash, wine, and regret. Beyond the palace walls, chaos became order of its own kind. The rebels had seized the markets, the gates, and the armories. Captain Roran, torn between oath and conscience, stood before his soldiers for the last time. He laid down his sword and told them that a kingdom built on silence deserved to be heard in flames. No man cheered, yet none stopped him. That night, the garrison doors were opened, and the city swallowed itself. In the shadows of the temple, High Priestess Solène tended to the wounded. The marble floors were streaked with blood and candle wax. She prayed not for victory, but for mercy. Beside her, Queen Ilara knelt, hands stained red from binding wounds that would not close. For the first time, royalty and faith shared the same silence. When the queen finally spoke, her voice broke like glass. It was never the people who betrayed us. It was us who forgot them. Deep beneath the palace, Prince Cale and Lady Myron descended into the crypt tunnels, carrying the sealed archives. The air was damp and cold, heavy with centuries of forgotten oaths. They planned to escape through the catacombs to save what truth remained. But when they reached the final gate, Cale stopped. He turned to Myron with the look of a man who had already chosen his fate. "If history must burn," he said, "then let it be by our hands, not theirs." When the flames reached the palace tower, the sky turned the color of copper and sorrow. From the courtyard, the people watched the banners fall, the golden crest curling in the heat. On the balcony above, King Alden appeared one last time. He removed his crown, placed it upon the stone rail, and whispered words none could hear. Then he turned and disappeared into the smoke. The wind took the crown moments later, rolling it into the fire below, and with it, the kingdom's name. Morning came without bells. The palace was gone, the city broken. Smoke clung to the earth like fog that refused to lift. What had been streets were now charred veins of memory. From the hills beyond, refugees watched the ruins of their home in silence. Some wept, others simply stared. The weight of loss too deep for sound. Among them walked Queen Alara, her crownless head bowed, her hands wrapped in the blood-stained fabric of her gown. She no longer looked like a queen, only a mother searching for what could not be found. Far to the south, beyond the river border, Captain Roran and a handful of soldiers made camp in the shadow of a ruined bridge. Their armor was gone. They wore plain cloaks now, hiding the marks of loyalty that once defined them. Around the fire, no one spoke the kingdom's name. Roran sharpened his sword not to fight but to remember. Each stroke of the whetstone sounded like a heartbeat fading away. Slow, steady, and unwilling to stop. In the eastern hills, Lady Myron wandered with the rescued scrolls bound in a cloth satchel. The words inside were worth more than gold or death. She found shelter in a monastery built long before the crown had risen. The monks did not ask her name, only that she rest. By candlelight, she began to rewrite the kingdom's history, word by word, so it would never vanish again. She wrote not of kings and crowns, but of silence, and the price it demanded. On the northern cliffs, Prince Cale stood alone overlooking the valley. His armor was gone, replaced by a cloak of coarse wool. He had lost his crown, his family, and the faith of his people. Yet, as the wind tore at his cloak, he saw movement in the valley below. Survivors rebuilding the bridges, tending the fires, refusing to vanish. The kingdom had died, but its people had not. For the first time, Cale felt something stronger than guilt, the fragile pulse of hope. In the temple ruins, High Priestess Solène knelt beside the shattered altar. Around her, wildflowers had begun to grow through cracks in the marble, small, defiant bursts of color against the gray. Her voice trembled as she whispered a prayer not for victory, but remembrance. The kingdom's name was gone from maps, its story erased from scrolls, yet memory found its way into hearts too stubborn to forget. Some losses are not meant to be mourned, they are meant to be learned. Years passed, the land healed slowly, though the earth still carried the scars of fire. Where once stood the palace, only a field of stones remained, each carved by survivors who returned to mark the names of those they'd lost. No map bore the kingdom's name anymore, but the wind still whispered it through the valleys. Queen Alara, older now, walked among the stones in silence, her steps uneven but certain. The crown she once wore was gone, yet her presence still carried the weight of something sacred, remembrance. In a remote monastery, Lady Myron's manuscripts began to spread. The monks copied her writings in secret, binding them in rough leather. What she had written was not a tale of power, but a confession of silence, the truth that kingdoms fall not by sword, but by the lies they choose to live with. Her words traveled from village to village, turning rumor into history. Though her name was never spoken, her voice endured in the stories told beside every heart. Prince Cale had become a wanderer, traveling through lands that no longer recognized his face. He worked among farmers, rebuilt bridges, and taught children how to read from what few pages he remembered of Myron's writings. To the world, he was no prince, just a man with a haunted gaze and quiet wisdom. One evening, as he watched the sunset over a valley reborn, he smiled for the first time in years. He had finally understood. Kingdoms fall, but stories endure. In the rebuilt villages, Old soldiers gathered in the evenings to tell tales by firelight. Captain Roran was among them, his once strong voice now raspy with age. He told of loyalty, betrayal, and the king who watched his own silence consume a nation. The children who listened never knew those names, but they remembered the lessons. A crown, he would say, is only as strong as the truth that holds it. His laughter came rarely, but when it did, it carried the warmth of forgiveness. Deep within the ruins of the old temple, High Priestess Solen's teachings lived on through her disciples. They rebuilt the altar not of marble, but of stone gathered from the homes of the fallen. When the first rains returned, the new temple walls shimmered with color from the wildflowers growing through the cracks. And as dawn broke over the valley, the people gathered there once more. Not to worship kings, but to remember a truth far greater. That silence, when faced, becomes wisdom, and wisdom becomes freedom. Centuries passed. The fields that once drank blood now yielded grain, and the river that had carried ashes now glimmered with light. The name of the lost kingdom faded from speech, replaced by tales told to children beside evening fires. Some said it had been cursed. Others said it had been betrayed by pride. Yet, in the quiet hours before dawn, travelers still claimed to hear faint bells drifting through the mist, a sound belonging to no time, no ruler, and no crown. The silence had become their song. In a distant library built upon the ashes of the old capital, Lady Mirren's final manuscript was found by scholars who did not know her name. The ink had faded, the parchment brittle, yet her words remained clear. History belongs not to kings, but to those who remember. The archivists copied her work carefully, unaware they were reviving the soul of a vanished land. Through them, her truth breathed again, quiet, steady, unbroken. Along the riverbanks, monuments rose where the kingdom's heart once stood. No royal faces were carved into stone, no banners draped across the sky, only words. Here, silence spoke the truth. Pilgrims came from distant lands to leave offerings, a sprig of wheat, a ring of iron, a tear upon the stone. They did not come to mourn a kingdom. They came to honor the cost of forgetting and the power of remembering. The story spread far beyond the valley. Minstrels turned it into songs, poets shaped it into verses, and teachers told it as history to children who never knew the names behind the tale. They spoke of a kingdom lost, not to war, but to silence. A silence that taught more than any victory could. And though the details changed with every tongue that spoke it, one truth remained. Every empire that forgets its people will one day forget itself. At the end of all things, the land stood quiet again. Green hills where battles once raged, rivers where kings once fell, and temples reborn beneath wildflowers. The kingdom was gone, yet it lived on in every voice that dared to tell its story. Time had turned betrayal into memory, and silence into wisdom. What vanished from the map had not vanished from the heart. The people had forgotten the name of their crown, but never the lesson it left behind.